Today we will deal with the aspect of model of the mind, and model of the mind is a very important element in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. We have seen before Freud's model of the mind, we have seen Jung's model of the mind, and now I will put forward my own model of the mind, which I call as HEAT, Holistic Elemental Analysis and Therapy. So today we will take an overview of the idea of model of the mind, then go to my model of the mind, and in that we will deal with the first part of my model of the mind, which I call as HEAT, by circumambulating philosophy related to HEAT model of the mind. Psychoanalysis, we have many schools: Freudian school, Plinian school, Jungian school, OSHO, Winnicottian, Bionian, ISTDP. If we look at all these schools, some schools have a model of the mind, some schools don't have a model of the mind, in the structural sense of the term. So let us first define what I call as the full school, three-quarter school, half school, and quarter school. I divide all schools in psychoanalysis in groups, which I term as: one group is full school, second is three-quarter school, third is half school, and fourth is quarter school. Now, what are the criteria for division? I call that school in psychoanalysis as the full school, where the school has four elements into it. The school has a philosophy, it has a model of the mind, it has pathogenesis, and it has a healing technique, what we call way of doing therapy. Any school in psychoanalysis which has these four conceptual elements well elaborated is what I call a full school in psychoanalysis. Unfortunately, we don't have any full school in psychoanalysis as yet. No school in psychoanalysis incorporates philosophy in a major way. There is a de facto philosophical foundation, which is by necessity discovered by inference, at times just mentioned in the passing by the founder, but never elaborated and incorporated in a cardinal way in the school of psychoanalysis. So we don't have any full school of psychoanalysis. All founders of psychoanalytic schools have either been not so strong in the area of philosophy or wanted to keep philosophy away. Either ways, philosophy has not been incorporated in a cardinal way in any school of psychoanalysis. So all schools of so I don't think there is any school of psychoanalysis which is a full school. Then we come to second group of schools, which I call three-quarter schools. These three-quarter schools, they don't have philosophy, but they have the other three elements: model of the mind, pathogenesis, and healing technique well elaborated. Freudian school and Jungian school fall in this category. After Freud and Jung, we never had thinkers in psychoanalysis who would create schools and also create a structural model of the mind. We never had model of the mind theorists of that caliber after Freud and Jung. One aspect also is that model of the mind is an extremely difficult area to work in. It requires a very long and patient working to really create an alternative model of the mind. So these are three-quarter schools. Freudian school and Jungian school are examples of it. Then we come to half schools, where we talk of pathogenesis and healing technique. We don't have a model of the mind, we don't have philosophy. Kleinian school, Winnicottian school, Kohutian school, ISTDP, they all fall in this category, half schools. Then we have quarter schools. Schools like Erickson School or Erickson, I think, would be a good example. There will be other examples. I'm not recollecting them, but here we don't have a clear pathogenesis of any given pathology, but we have broad concepts and a broad healing technique with a unique flavor. There is no specialized healing technique, no specialized way of doing, no distinct way of doing therapy, and no distinct pathogenesis offered for any given pathology. So there are concepts, broad concepts, and a healing technique with a unique, slightly unique flavor. I call these schools as quarter schools. So all schools in psychoanalysis we can divide into these four categories: full school, three-quarter schools, half school, and quarter school. Since no school in psychoanalysis is a full school, and no model of the mind extends backward into philosophy and forward into purpose, there is a need for such a school, no matter how imperfect, how incomplete, and how ambitious it may seem. And to fill this void, I have created a model of the mind which has all the four elements, which I call HEAT, Holistic Elemental Analysis and Therapy. Now, model of the mind, or MOM, is very important in psychoanalysis. So let us circumambulate about this concept and see what we can learn from it. We can have two broad approaches in psychoanalysis: a heuristic phenomenological approach and a causal approach. A heuristic phenomenological approach is the approach of ISTDP, the approach of Winnicottian school. It is also the approach of schools outside of psychoanalysis like existential psychotherapy, where they are not concerned so much with an exact specific cause like the Freudians or the Kleinians are. Rather, they look at some broad phenomenological area which is responsible for a problem, and they try to deal it in some way or the other. Let me not say some way or the other, they deal it in the way they feel is the best way to deal it. Versus the causal approach. The causal approach tries to find out a very clear root of the problem, like the Freudian school does, like the Kleinian school does, and then address it in some way in therapy. Within the causal approach, we can have two broad categories: the structural causal approach and the functional causal approach. The Freudian school has a structural causal approach where there is a very structured model of the mind, there is a structured psychosexual development, and in that structure are the roots of all pathology. Versus a Kleinian approach, a Winnicottian Kleinian approach, a Bionian approach, where the approach is functional. It is a causal approach. The cause is the split, cause is the envy, cause is the greed, cause is the aggression, but it's largely a functional approach. In the Kleinian school, we don't find a clear model of the mind. So it's a causal approach, but a functional approach. We find these two approaches, and obviously a structural causal approach is the most rigorous and most comprehensive of all the four approaches, rather three approaches. Model of the mind is the foundation of any school or approach, because the sequence is, first you, in any school, ideally, there should be a model of the mind, that this is how the mind works. Then pathogenesis, that because the mind works in this way, this is how pathology develops. And from pathogenesis, we come to the treatment plan, that if this is how pathology develops, then this is the treatment plan. Absent model of the mind, the school is without a foundation. Any school that does not have a model of the mind will always run into problems when they get into difficult cases. Because you don't know how it works, you also don't know when it does not work. So any phenomenological school which is not causal, or any causal school which is not structural, will inevitably run into unsolvable problems in complicated cases. Not that if we have a structured causal approach, you solve all problems. That's not the point. The point is, when you cannot solve the problem, you know why you can't solve the problem, at least in terms of the internal explanation of the school. So model of the mind is the mom of any school. And this is where it's very important. If we look at history of psychoanalysis and outside of psychoanalysis, model of the mind have been created by many schools. Within psychoanalysis, Freud created model of the mind, Jung created model of the mind. After both of them, we never had people of that caliber in the sense of creating a structural model of the mind. Freud created three models. Two were structural, one was functional. The structural models are very popular. The first was topographical model, second was structural model, and towards the end of his life, he postulated a two-force model of eros and thanatos, life instinct and death instinct, which was a functional model. And he never tried to integrate the functional with the structural. Jung created a model of the mind which has self at the center, collective unconscious around the self, personal unconscious around the collective unconscious, and the conscious around the personal unconscious, with the ego being in the conscious and the archetypes populating the collective unconscious. So Jung had a very different model of the mind. Indian psychology is very ancient, and there are many models of the mind in Indian psychology, just as there are many models of the mind in psychoanalysis and many models of the mind outside of psychoanalysis but within Western psychology. In India, we have more than 10 to 15 popular models of the mind, some in the area of Buddhist psychology, some in the area of yogic psychology, some in the area of Shaiva psychology, some in the area of Vaishnava psychology, some in the area of Jain psychology, and so on. Three models of the mind which are very popular and which we can take up for discussion in our context are the yogic model of the mind, the Tantra model of the mind, and Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind. I will show you towards the end, if we have time, or we will do it next time, how these models are. I will show you all the models of the mind I have put up here. Freud's three models, Jung's model, and Indian psychology, at least three models. So 3, 4, 3, 7. 7 models of the mind. If I have time, I'll show you today, or if not, next time. Preferably, try to show it today. Let me just see how it rolls on. The point is, can we synthesize these existing models of the mind and develop it further? because every model of the mind has its own strengths and weaknesses. So if we try to put together the best of all these models of the mind and create an integrated model of the mind, what would it look like? And then, having created the integrated model of the mind, how to develop it further by adding our own innovative concepts into that model of the mind. That is the enterprise we will be embarking on today, or rather in the course of these 3 sessions. So can we synthesize the existing models of the mind and develop that integrated model further? Yes, we can, and that is what I have done and created this HEAT model of the mind. HEAT is an acronym for Holistic Elemental Analysis and Therapy. Now, what does each of these words mean? What do you mean by holistic? Why the word elemental? And how do we use holistic and elemental approach in analysis and therapy? As we go along, I will clear the meaning of these terms. So let us slowly get into the HEAT model of the mind. And as I said, if I look at creating a school called the HEAT school, it would need, in order to be a full school, a philosophy, a model of the mind, pathogenesis, and healing technique. And the model of the mind there can be the HEAT model of the mind. Based upon it, a unique pathogenesis, and based upon it, a holistic healing technique. So let us start first with the philosophical aspect of HEAT. Philosophical characteristics of this HEAT school or the HEAT model are 7. This model or this school is based upon, and this school and this model also is based upon the philosophy of open structuralism. There are 2 ways of analyzing the world or any phenomena. One is to analyze in structural terms, and second is to analyze in functional terms or post-structural terms. So on one hand, we have structuralism. On the other hand, we have post-structuralism, and in between, or rather outside of it, we have something called open structuralism. So it is a structural model of the mind, but the structure is an open structure. When we go into it, I will narrate what passes through the openings of this open structure. So it is an open structure, and the philosophical foundation is of open structuralism. It is structuralism because I personally believe if you say goodbye to structure, we are essentially saying goodbye to exact science. And instead of complementing exact science with openness, with something which is not structural, we are throwing away much of the science when we throw away structuralism. So the good idea is to complement structuralism if necessary by something non-structural, rather than looking at that something non-structural, which is a small part of the whole knowledge domain, and substitute a large structural rigorous edifice with a much smaller non-structural entity. So philosophically, it is based on open structuralism. This model of the mind also is based upon a teleological approach. Teleological approach meaning a purposive approach, that there is a purpose to universe, that there is a purpose to human life, that there is a purpose to the human mind. The purpose need not always be idealistic, it may be hedonistic, it may be hedonistic plus idealistic, it may be something else, but there is a purpose. The human mind is a very teleological mechanism. This philosophy is also based on a structural concept of reality, which is very different from the prevailing structural concept of reality in the world today, especially in the West. The structural concept of reality on which this philosophy is based is the Eastern structural concept of reality. And in the Eastern conceptualization, the universe is seen as constituted of different zones. One zone is the zone of matter, energy, and force. Then we have a zone of life energy. Then a zone of emotions, a zone of thoughts, a zone of karma, and a zone of pure consciousness. You can also call it the zone of soul, pure soul, and then you can postulate a zone of pure consciousness. And the idea here is that the soul takes some part from each of these zones to create the human system. And therefore, in the human system, we not only have a physical body which is made up of matter, energy, and force, rather constituted of matter, energy, and force, but along with the physical body, we also have a life energy body or the astral body. Behind that, an emotional body, behind that, a thought body, behind that, a karmic body, and behind that, the soul or the psychic that is evolving. This philosophy, therefore, looks at the human system in a very different way. And this is a very ancient idea. There is nothing new about it. It's an ancient Eastern idea. This philosophy is also based upon evolution. That there is some sort of evolution, both personal as well as collective, which is on in the planet. And what is happening is something purposive. It is not something ad hoc, that something happens only by chance. So we see a design behind evolution. Sorry, we see design behind human history, behind human life, and one of the core elements of that design is evolution. Evolution not only biological, the way Darwin talks about, but also spiritual, the way Sri Aurobindo talks about, or the way evolution not only biological in the way Darwin talks about, but also in the way that Eastern psychophilosophy, spiritual schools have always talked about, and Sri Aurobindo has also elaborately talked about. This philosophy also takes into account suprahuman forces and beings. So it postulates existence of suprahuman forces and beings which play a role in human affairs and therefore may be playing some role in the way human mind operates, if not always, at least in some occasions. This philosophy is based upon theism, and it's based upon a modular model of the mind, which means if you are not a believer, you can remove the theistic parts, the suprahuman parts, those parts which take into account some sort of belief, and reduce this model of the mind to a secular model of the mind, and even though you do it, that secular model of the mind still is a rich model of the mind and can be used very effectively as a model of the mind. The conceptualization would still work. So it's a modular model where a comprehensive model is a believer's model, but if you remove the believer's aspects of it, you are left with a secular model, and that also would work. So it's a very modular model that is created.
So I want to know about these supra-human elements. What basically are these?
Yeah. So the suprahuman elements refer to uh, suprahuman spirits and beings, those who are ahead of us in evolution, and those who are helping us in some form or the other. People talk about angels, people talk about gurus who are no longer alive, people talk about uh, good spirits and not good spirits. People talk about forces of nature which can be harnessed positively or negatively. These constitute the suprahuman elements.
Okay.
I sent you a new invite. This is getting over.